beautiful yoga friends. We are nearing the end of our series. We've got one class left after tonight. But don't fret, these recordings will live on into the future, so you can always come back and revisit any or all of the classes from this series. So tonight, we're going to be working on a slightly yin yoga adjacent concept, if you will. It's not really part of the core of what yin yoga is, but what we're going to be working on a little bit more tonight is what's referred to as myofascial release. And it's basically what a lot of like good deep tissue massage is doing for you. It's a type of massage which you can apply to yourself, as we'll do tonight. You can use some props to facilitate the release of that tension. But in many ways, the yin holds, the length of the pose that we hold, is a type of myofascial release in its way. So what we're going to do tonight is explore how the assistance of props in a specific way can deepen, if you will, some of the myofascial release. So we're going to work on some pretty sensitive areas, and the props will help us kind of get deeper into some of those typically like really tight, tense areas. One of the keys to fascia in general is that it doesn't move as quickly as muscle. So yin is a beautiful complementary practice because it really kind of takes some time for those tissues to kind of actually let go. So the theme of tonight's class is just kind of like letting go. It seemed like a nice way to start to sort of waken up from winter as we're getting closer to spring, kind of like starting to like shake those cobwebs off, when you've been sitting or laying for a long time, you're stiff. So anyway, with that all in mind, and the theme of both physically and, as we'll kind of discuss a little bit throughout class, emotionally letting go, I invite you to please go ahead and get comfortable and let your eyes float closed or softly gazing down to the ground in front of you. And as we begin every class, slowly but surely bring your attention to your breath. We're not making any efforts to judge it, to change it, to fit it into any pattern. We're just becoming aware of the sensation of the air passing through our nostrils, of our diaphragm expanding and contracting, making space for our lungs to fill, or helping to push the spent air back out. Just aware. And as we follow our breath down into our bodies, we can begin to exist entirely in this present moment. When we are present with each expanding and contracting breath, perhaps recognizing the beating of our own heart, it's pretty much impossible for your mind to have space to wander to the future and what might come next, what might happen if, or to the past where you're chewing over something that maybe happened earlier in the day that you haven't been able to let go of yet. So simply being present with our breath brings us to a state of mindfulness and presence that facilitates letting go. We'll go ahead and just deepen our breath a little bit more, maybe begin to lengthen your inhale. And go ahead and match your exhale the same length as your inhale. Remembering that our breath stems from deep in our belly and rises up. So now that we've just been observant of how our breath is in our body, we are making some efforts to deepen it, to bring it down into our belly, to deepen it from just chest breathing. And let's go ahead and take a deep inhale. And let's begin to let our exhales become just a couple breaths longer, a couple beats longer. Lengthening our exhales is a sign to our nervous system that it can take a chill, it can relax, and that further facilitates our body's physical ability to release and let go of held attention. And thinking about the idea of letting go, whether it's maybe finding some relief from some physical sensations and tension. Maybe it's something that happened earlier today or earlier this week that you haven't quite been able to stop worrying about or thinking about. But I invite you to find an intention for tonight's practice and repeat it to yourself as you take 3 measured inhales and exhales. It could be something as general as, I let go of what no longer serves me. And when you've taken your final exhalation, go ahead and let your eyes flutter open, and we'll begin the active portion of our class. So for a change, we're actually going to start standing up. I know it's going to be okay. We're just going to stand for one pose. I promise it'll be okay. So let's go ahead and come up to our feet. Ooh, get all those pops and cracks out from sitting. And it's okay that you can't see the upper part of me right now, because what we're focused on is really from this like sort of rib cage down more than anything right now. So let's go ahead and get our feet parallel at about hip width. Parallel means that there's no turning out, there's no turning in. We're just parallel right now. Rock back and forth a little bit onto your heels, onto your toes, and just kind of experience what moving your weight between those two places feels like. And as you do, slowly bring that rocking to a little bit less until you find stillness and balance with weight evenly distributed between the front and the back of your feet. And then sort of from side to side. Go ahead, lift your toes up and really feel that front pad of your foot pressing into the ground. Now lift up from your arches. Keep a micro bend in your knees, both knees. Let your tailbone relax, but don't tuck it all the way under. Just let it be long, but maintain that slight curve. Let your ribs float above your hips, shoulders, which you can't see, but if you could, you'd see that they're nice and relaxed away from my ears. Now from here, this is a pretty neutral, grounded stance. But what we're going to find when we move forward, when we bend forward and then get a different stance, is that oftentimes, because of ways that we hold ourselves in sitting and standing, we're not actually accessing our greatest flexibility, because we're not bending from the right place and we're not releasing, lengthening the right muscles. So from here, go ahead, inhale your arms up, up, up overhead. Exhale, and let's fold forward.
as far as you can. Maybe you touch the ground, maybe your hands come to your shins or above your knees. Never quite on your knees. You don't want to add any more pressure to them. But from here, let's just take a breath or two. You can maybe sway a little bit if you'd like, but what we're really trying to dial into is what the sensation feels like on the backs of our legs and across our low back and our sort of hip area. We'll just pause here for a minute, making sure we're keeping at least a tiny little micro bend in our knees so that they're not flexing backwards. Beautiful. Go ahead. Inhale and sweep yourself back up. Arms come up overhead. Exhale, arms come down by our sides. Now from here, we're going to actually turn our toes in as far as we can comfortably and kind of knock our knees together, sort of like if you had to go to the bathroom and you were really trying not to, or like you were going to try and walk like a pigeon toe, I guess is what this is called, right? Or anyway, point inward, knees together. And then from here, we're going to go ahead again and inhale, arms come up overhead, exhale, arms float down as we fold forward, maintaining that inward rotation of our feet and that bend in our knees with them kind of coming in together. They're going to want to spread a little bit further apart. That's okay. But perhaps now that you're here, you've actually noticed that you can get a little further down. Maybe not a lot further, but you may actually have found more space here. And that's because part of what this is doing is actually forcing us to bend at the hip instead of rolling our back over. So just take a minute here, a few breaths. We won't be here long. But just noticing how this feels different than the forward fold we were just in. Beautiful inhale. Sweep your arms back up, come back up to standing, and then let your feet come back to whatever is your neutral stance. And that's it. That's all the standing we're going to do tonight. So go ahead and meet me back down on the mat. Okay? Beautiful. Now we're going to take that same principle and we're going to apply it to our caterpillar pose or our forward fold. So getting this little cushion under your hips here is kind of part of like an equivalent to the second posture that we took. It's just going to help you get a little bit more access into the forward fold. So I like to put it under just under my sit bones, nothing super high, just a little bit of extra height. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab some other props, maybe a block. I want to really let my torso relax as we fold forward and really focus on getting a nice stretch along the backs of my legs. So from here, we're going to inhale, grow really long in the spine. And then exhale, remembering what it just felt like. Think as much as you can about hinging from the hips instead of rounding your back to get forward. So if that means that you don't come as far forward as normal, that's okay. But we're really aiming to be bending from that hip joint and not bending our back forward into the shape. So nice flat back here. And then once we're here, go ahead, find some sort of comfortable way of resting your head. I'm gonna go like this, propping my elbows up on a block on top of the blankets on top of my legs. And just let my hands hold the weight of my head. And as with traditional yin, we find this pose, we find our edge, and then we come to stillness and we let our breath support us through. Really make sure that as you're sinking into this posture that you're not letting your tailbone tuck and your low back round. We're really trying to keep that actively engaged to keep that forward bend at the hip joint. Feet can be flexed or they can be relaxed. I have mine flexed, just a little extra juice on that stretch along the back of the leg. The final few breaths, if you've found a little more space, maybe go ahead and take it for a beat. If not, stay where you were. It's fine. All right, go ahead and inhale, walk yourself back up to seated. Let's go ahead and get any props that we had out of our way. And I'm going to turn to face you. You can stay where you were if you'd like. And we're going to just come into a half straddle pose. So keep your props nearby. Same thing as before. We're going to really try and focus on how our legs are activated and stretching and what's letting go down there, and less worried about our torso, which means having some props to lean into is going to be really useful. So I'm going to actually go ahead this time and I'm going to grab 2 blocks. And I've got my left leg out to the side, wherever out to the side is for you tonight. And my foot is flexed. My right leg is bent with my heel kind of right at my midline. And again, that can be as far forward or as close in as feels comfortable. We can even get a blanket or a towel under our knee if that's getting a little uncomfortable thinking about holding in that position. And then I'm going to bring my blocks in front of me and I'm going to stack them up. Because what we're going to do now is, with all of those things in place, we're going to, like we did before, bending at the hips. We're going to exhale and walk ourselves as far forward as we can until we find that edge. Adjust your props as necessary. I like to get mine set up so that the very edge is what I'm resting my head on. We come to stillness and our breath. Sometimes while I'm here, if I have a block under my forehead, I like to just give that a little roll back and forth. Release a little bit of tension from the forehead and eyebrows. And all these little micro facial muscles that we don't think about, but they hold tension too. If the stretch on your left leg is feeling a little too intense, you can relax it a little bit by letting that foot kind of relax. Otherwise, let's go ahead, in the interest of releasing the tension, create more tension by flexing it. About now, you might be really grateful that you put a blanket under your right knee, or you might be reaching for something to put there. That's okay. All right, let's go ahead and inhale, walk ourselves back up to seated. And let's get our props adjusted. We're going to go to the other side. So, right leg is out to whatever the side looks like for you. How far in or out that is entirely a function of your body and your body right now, because it may be different than it was this morning or will be tomorrow. It also may be different than where it was on your left side. That's totally normal too. As we've discussed, we use both sides of our bodies differently throughout the course of our day. So it's natural that one side would respond or feel differently. So we've got that right leg out, foot is flexed, right knee, oh geez, left knee bent. Get your prop under there to help support it.
And then that left foot is at the midline, but in or out as far as is comfortable. We inhale and grow long. And exhale, folding forward at the hips. We walk ourselves forward until we find the edge. Get our props adjusted to support us in being right at that edge. And then we find stillness. So in yin yoga, the two sort of features, well, all of the features of yoga, of yin yoga, are what really help us get into the fascia. So in myofascial, the myo refers to your muscle tissue, and the fascial refers to your fascia, or it's a sort of a 3D matrix of supporting tissues that run sort of at all layers in and around your muscles. And they help to provide a sort of scaffolding for the muscle fibers. And that fascia can also get kind of tangled up and tense and stuck in place. And it can be a little bit more difficult to stretch the way that we think of stretching our muscles. So the time and stillness, in addition to the pressure of the pose in yin, is what allows us to get into that sort of slower tissue, the fascia. All right, let's go ahead and inhale, walk ourselves back up to a seated position. Leave your left leg where it was and bring your right leg in to meet it. At this point, you can either put a blanket under both sides if you have something to prop both sides. You can pick if a side feels more sort of sticky or you have more knee problems on one side than the other. Otherwise, you can just go without at this point, because we're going to come into our butterfly pose here with our knees bent. And we're going to do that same thing. We're going to fold forward again. So we're going to inhale and grow long. And exhale, hinging at the spine, not tucking our tail and rounding our backs, keeping that back straight and engaged. And we bend forward until we find that edge. You adjust your props to support you at that edge, and then come to stillness. Be mindful as you're holding that you're not unconsciously sliding into a rounded back. It's so easy to do. It's how most of our bodies are used to sort of holding themselves. So even though we're thinking about kind of relaxing our torsos and leaning into the pose, we may have to be more conscious about keeping ourselves in this form and not relapsing into what is ultimately a type of stuck muscular and myofascial holding. Is That's how our bodies become sort of stuck in a way, because we repeat that motion or that position over and over again. If you have opened up any additional space in this pose, you can access it now. At this point, you may wish to stay where you are, or maybe you find a little more space, but just remember that tonight, if we access that space, we're still doing it with our back flat and not letting our low back round to access it.
If you moved, find stillness. If you stayed where you were, you're cool. Just a few more breaths. Beautiful. Inhale, walk yourself back up. Awesome. So we're going to come into a sort of hero pose, which I'll demonstrate forward and then I'll turn to my side so you can see what we're going to be doing. So hero pose is basically just kneeling. So my weight is distributed along the shins and the tops of my legs, right? So from the side, it looks kind of like this. So this in and of itself might be kind of a lot. That's okay. So the first thing that we're going to do from here, and we're not going to be in any of these poses very long because there's a lot of sensation in these parts of our body, but from here, we're going to lean back, and I'm going to actually go ahead and keep my blanket stacked up behind me to help my hands reach the ground. We're going to lean back and kind of think about peeling your knees off the mat, and it's going to get a really intense stretch across the top of your ankle and the top of your foot. If this is like, actually you're like, no, then just stay seated upright in just your standard warrior pose or hero pose, and that's gonna be a lot of sensation in that same place. But if you have it in you, get that extra little stretch in, and then let's just come back out of that. Beautiful. Oh yeah, it's a lot of sensation, friends. I know. All right. Then from here, you're gonna lean forward a little bit, come to hands and knees, but we're gonna tuck our toes. And now this is full disclosure, I don't have a lot of access in this space. What we're looking to do is create a stretch along the back of our toes and into our feet. So to do that, as we curl, we're going to think about, and folks, right here's where my audio cut out. So what we're thinking about is coming up into a full seated position. But if that's too much sensation, then just come back to with your hands down on the mat and kind of work your hips back over your heels in a movement as if we were coming into seated position. But if you have the space, if you have the access, then go ahead and sit up for just a second. And all right, we'll come back out of that and let our feet relax. Let's go ahead and do some tapping tops of our feet on the mat gently, and maybe a little side to side. Just get a little movement back into those tender little areas. Yeah, that was a lot. Thanks for sticking through it with me. Let's get our props set up for our next pose. We're going to come into a supported frog pose, and that's going to be working this sort of inner groin area. It can be a pretty sensitive area, so we're going to want to make sure that we get a lot of good support under ourselves to lift ourselves up off of the mat. So we've got our 2 blankets here. If you had a thicker pillow or a bolster, you could get that lined up. Or if you have blocks and just 1 blanket, you can put your blocks in front of you in the middle of the mat like this, and then put just a little extra cushioning because it's not fun to lay on the mat, on the blocks like that. But the idea is that we've got our decently high stack of props lined up along the middle of our mat. I'm going to switch back to my blankets here. And we want to have them sort of evenly spaced between our knees and lined up the bottom of it about where our knees are on the mat. Great. And then we're going to walk ourselves forward into hands and knees with our knees wide. And let's lower our chests down first to the mat. And now let your knees slide as far out to the side as they are comfortable getting. Sorry, we had another technical error over here, and we had to let someone back into the class. All right, so we are using our cushioning to hold ourselves up and supported to gain some extra space. This can be a very tender, difficult area to stretch into. So the tighter that this inner groin muscle is, the more prop elevation you want to work with. And
you can further increase the sensation or decrease the sensation if you need to by just kind of holding yourself up a little further. If you don't have enough prop in it, I promise even holding yourself in it, you're going to get still plenty of stretch in that inner groin area. But also you can let the prop hold you where you have it, but address the level of sensation in the stretch by actually shifting your knees either further away from you or further up towards your elbows. Further away is going to lessen the impact of the stretch, and moving them up towards you is where you're going to increase some additional sensation. And once you have found that edge and are ready, then settle in for some stillness. Let's come to our breath. This can be a lot of sensation, so try and stick with it. Come to your breath. Your breath will help you through. But as always in yin, we're not looking to cause damage. We're not looking for our deepest stretch. So if this is uncomfortable beyond the point of your edge, please back out of it. We're never looking to experience a sharp or tearing sort of pain or any sort of electrical fizzing sensation. It should be just at the very edge of comfort, of discomfort, and that's where we want to stay. And we've talked a little bit about physically holding on, but emotionally, the idea in somatics is that our bodies can hold on to physical expressions of emotions or thoughts that we can't process or let go of. And our hips and groin area can really be a very delicate, tender place that a lot of stuck emotion can be held. So if you're experiencing any sort of surge of strange emotion suddenly, just be kind and gentle with yourself. It's likely that your body is actually accessing some stored, held onto emotion in the form of physical tension as well. All right, folks, you're going to come back out of this now. So put your weight into your forearms and use those to help you sort of peel yourself back up. Bring your knees under you and walk your weight back onto your feet. Beautiful. We're going to get some of our props out of the way. Keep your blanket or towel with you, and we're going to unfold it now actually to its longest edge. And then we're going to roll it up as tightly as we can into a long, sort of skinny, rolled blanket. And this is what we're going to use as a prop for our next few poses. Get it rolled nice and tight. It tends to unroll as we move it around, so make sure it's nice and tight. And we want to get it as firmly rolled and as much height in it as we possibly can. So I've got it placed roughly in the middle of the mat because that's about where we're going to access it. And we're going to get into, on our front here, this space sort of just above the top of our hip bone. So kind of right below the belly button at the top of the front of your hip there. That's the space that we're aiming to get this prop into as we come forward into our Sphinx pose. So come to your hands and knees, kind of line yourself up about where you think you're going to be, and then adjust as you work your way down. I'm shimmying back a little bit to really make sure that we're getting that rolled up blanket or towel prop really into that space just above the hip bone, and that's going to help get into that iliopsoas as well. That can hold a lot of tension from how we sit and move throughout the day. And as it's a Sphinx pose, you're going to come bring your elbows to the mat, forearms and hands are pressed firmly into the mat, and we use that pressure against our forearms to help us sort of peel our chests away from the floor a little bit, deepen the back bend just a little bit. But we're not going for the deepest back bend sensation here. We're really much more concerned about the experience of gravity pushing us down into the mat and over this rolled up blanket or towel prop to really let that access into these delicate, soft, but tense tissues and begin to help us open them up. As with yin, always, when it gets difficult, we come to our breath. In this case, our breath may increase the sensation as the air moves our bellies sort of further into and then back away from the prop. But don't let that discourage you. The breath will help carry you through. And in fact, that gentle additional massaging motion is just going to help soften those tissues up around the prop a little bit more. Our feet are pointed and our legs are nice and engaged, and that engagement is also just helping to really weight us down into the mat and into the prop to address those tissues. All right. At this point, you could go ahead and let our torsos relax. You can cross your forearms in front of you and let your forehead rest on your hands for a moment, noticing how this changes the sensation of the prop beneath you. We'll be here for just a few more rounds of breath now, my friends.
Okay, go ahead, inhale, walk yourself back up to your elbows, tuck your toes, and come back up onto your hands and knees. And let's just tighten that roll again if we need to, because we're gonna come right back to it. And we're gonna come onto now our backs. And for this first version of a supported bridge pose, we're looking to get the roll right at the place where our back kind of has a natural curve in it. So we're going to want it to be a little bit higher up at the sort of top of your bottom, and so that at your bottom is sort of rolling just very gently off of the edge of the prop, and gently just sort of barely touching the floor. And this is encouraging the sort of natural curve in our low back there that oftentimes gets sort of tucked under in the way that we tend to sit rounded forward. Your arms can be relaxed gently down by your sides, out a little further, whatever feels comfortable. The point here is that we have this prop under our back, our feet are planted on the mat, our knees are up. And we breathe. This is one of those sort of sneaky poses that at first it maybe doesn't seem like there's going to be all that much sensation involved, but as the time begins to pass and the muscles start to relax and release some of the tension, you do actually begin to feel that this is maybe a stretch that you weren't quite anticipating coming in. We want to make sure as we're here that our shoulders aren't sort of ending up creeping up towards our ears or curling forward still, but we're really keeping them released down and spread nicely across the mat behind us. All right, let's go ahead. Inhale, curl your hips up as if we were coming into an unsupported bridge. And now we're just going to kind of gently shimmy our rolled up blanket or towel down just a couple of inches. And the goal here now is that our prop is right underneath our tailbone, so right at the bottom of our spine. It's probably a couple of inches or so down from where you just were. And this is actually going to bring our spine into almost the opposite, with a little bit of a tilt of the pelvis in the opposite direction, not an extreme one. And it's just going to be a nice kind of counterbalance to that pose we were just in. So we don't want to curl our hips up any further and further accentuate that, but we do want to allow that to be a little bit sort of propped up in a different direction than the last pose was. And then we come back to our breath.
All right, folks, go ahead again and lift your hips up and move the prop out of the way so that you can come comfortably up to a seated position. And we're going to take a quick side version of this too. So come into your sort of little mermaid pose here. And we're going to lean towards the right first, but whichever side feels right to you, go ahead and position your hips so that as you come down onto that rolled up blanket or towel, you're coming right above the top of the hip and getting into that sort of tender, juicy space between your hip and your ribs. And we want to be nice and like really on the outside edge of our body, not rolled forward or rolling back, although those are also nice additional versions of this to get into more of that fascia. But for now, we're just kind of right on our edge on our side. And you can have your head propped up on your hand with your elbow up, or you can go ahead and let your head rest on your arm on the floor. Really notice the way that your breath feels moving into this part of your body with the prop there. The way that with every inhale, your rib cage sort of moves and you kind of expand away from the prop, and with every exhale you soften, and it is able to sort of maybe come a little bit further into softening those tissues. And let's go ahead, inhale, come back up. And probably the easiest thing to do is just to actually turn around and flip sides rather than having to move the prop because it unrolls so easily. So I'm going to come to my other side. I'm going to come back to my sort of mermaid pose, line myself up so that the roll is just above the top of my left hip, and that prop is accessing the space between my ribs and my hip. Come to the edge of your side, not forward or backward, and find that nice edge and hold and breathe. All right, let's go ahead and work our way back up to a seated position. And let's keep our blanket or towel rolled up like this and set it off to the side. There's going to be an optional use for it again in our final Shavasana. We're going to come onto our backs now, and we're going to bring our arms out to the side in a T shape. Feet are on the floor. Knees are in the air. And first, let's just do a little bit of sort of rocking side to side. Give everything a little bit of a chance to get some movement. We've had a lot of sensation, a lot of work in that area that's sort of deeply involved in the twists. So we're going to lift our hips up, bump them a little towards the left, and then let our knees fall over to the right. right hand can come to knee to help keep that in the twist. And you have the option for a little bit of extra twistiness to take your head and look over your left shoulder out to your left hand. All right, inhale, bring your knees back up to center, plant your feet on the floor, lift your hips up, bump them over to the right, knees up in the air, and roll them over to the left, left hand to knee, right arm out to the side, and head and neck can be turned over to look at the right hand for a little extra twistiness. Come to that edge in the twist as deep as it feels right. Come to stillness and we breathe. Inhale your legs back to center, drop your feet to the mat and let your hips straighten out. And come up to seated. And I'm gonna show you the option that we have for our final resting pose tonight. If you would like, you can bring your rolled up blanket or towel to the middle of your mat the long way. And then what you would do is kind of come onto it so that you are sitting over the roll and scoot yourself back so that you are now laying with the rolled up blanket or towel along the length of your spine. You do want to have it also underneath your head. Hopefully it's long enough that it goes from the top of your head at least down to the end of your tailbone. If you do not feel like this is how you want to roll, no pun intended, then please go ahead and avoid the prop and just come into your standard Shavasana pose. Our feet are spread wide to the edges of our mat and relaxed. Our arms are out about 6 to 8 inches away from our body with our palms facing up towards the sky. If you haven't yet, bring your eyes closed. Get your final wiggles out and settle in. And as we did at the beginning of class, we bring our awareness back to our breath. Curious but not judgmental. Explore how the sensation of breathing may feel different than it did at the beginning of class, now that we have worked into and hopefully softened some of our muscle and fascia through the course of our stretching this evening. Follow the breath down into your body. Come to stillness. Stillness is its own kind of letting go. And breathe.
begin to bring your awareness back to this time and space. If you took the option with the prop, bring a little bit of movement to your fingers and toes. And then we're going to just very gently tip to one side and get the prop out of our way, returning to join our friends who did not use the prop into a few moments of Shavasana on the mat. Noticing if you took this option, how you may feel a sensation along your spine from where the release of that pressure was under your back. Whichever Shavasana you took, bring that movement to your fingers and toes. Roll to whichever side feels comfortable and find your way back up to a seated position. I thank you so much for your practice tonight. The light in me honors the light in you. I hope that this class has served you well, and wherever you go, you have a beautiful rest of your day. Namaste.